was already pretty strong, but with the new Inferno 8 main hand, it is even stronger. Today I'm going to be sharing my setup for you and suggestions if you are free to play. Let's go. So this is a build that I've shared a few times, and I'm constantly working on my builds, constantly trying to make things stronger. I've swapped out a couple of essences, and I've also swapped out some of my reforges and done a couple of other bits to make this build stronger. So we're going to test this today. Now I'm going to talk through everything in this video. I'll go through essences, I'll go through reforges, I will go through the Paragon that I'm using, warband buff that I'm using, and I'll also give you some options for free to play legendary gems. So if you're not someone that spends in game, I will give you options. Now some of these options are quite surprising and can give a decent amount of damage as well. I'm not going to be able to show you all of those gems, unfortunately, because I don't have the gem power to actually put them all in my setup, but I will be able to talk you through different gems that you can utilize in this build. So to begin with, we're going to do a 30-second test at the dummy, and I'm going to go quiet for this test because I find it really hard to focus on talking and actually hitting all the buttons at the same time. So let's go ahead and test this now. So in 30 seconds, we have 10.77 million damage. Now this can go up to about 13 million damage. There's a few different things you can do with combat stance. So if you start off with the, I always forget what it's called, the restraint, sorry, let's start again. If you start off with the restraint stance and swap to the focus stance, that will give you a little bit of a boost in damage initially. So that's generally what I do when I go into Elite raids. I start off with the restraint. Why do I keep saying the wrong thing? Start off with the restraint stance when I go into Elite raids, and as soon as I start hitting the boss, I will swap to the focus stance. So we're also going to test this out in a Elite raid so you can see the damage. And I'll also show you in a solo dungeon, and this will be on Inferno 8 difficulty, and then we'll be able to actually see exactly what this build is capable of and what kind of damage you can do as well. So I will go through, as I said, everything in this build as well. I'm not going to leave you guessing what I'm using or anything like that. So we'll go for this boss. I'm not that much over the combat rating, as you can see. I'm only less than 300 over the combat rating, and we'll test this out and see what damage we can actually cause. So we're going to be running this raid completely solo. This is Thorncrown Stalker of the Deepwoods, and you can see this is on Inferno 8 difficulty as well. I've already swapped my combat stance to the focus, no, not to the focus stance, to the restraint stance. And we're going to swap it to the focus stance as soon as we get into this boss. Now, as I've already mentioned, if you play this on PC or if you play this on iPad, you will most likely get much better damage than I do from this build. But I wanted to give you an idea of what it's like on mobile and how quickly you can actually take down these bosses as well, and what kind of damage you get in a HP raid. Because obviously with shields, etc., with the gaps in between with like immunity and things like that, with bosses it can take a little bit longer than when you test it, and the damage will probably be a little bit lower. So we've got 7.45 million damage per second there, and we've got 179 million damage in total. And you can see we managed to take the boss down super quickly as well. So that just gives you an idea of it in a Elite Crew raid. And I'm now going to go ahead and test this in a dungeon on Inferno 8 difficulty as well, so you can see what kind of damage you get per second running that. Now obviously dungeon damage is a little bit hard to track, simply because you have gaps in the dungeon where you're moving, where there's no mobs, etc. So the damage isn't going to be quite as high, but it will still give us a little bit of an idea of what kind of damage and how quickly you can complete things with this exact setup. So I'm just running this as a standard dungeon rather than challenge dungeon. I generally don't run challenge dungeons very often, simply because if you get sacrificial power with this build, you are totally screwed. And that seems to appear quite a lot in these challenge dungeons. So we've just gone for the normal dungeon here instead. And you can see it's really quick to actually defeat monsters with this build. You can see the damage per second is already dropping because we have pauses here in where we're actually creating any kind of damage. But we can take down a lot of these elite monsters pretty quickly, and that is partly because of Reforges as well, which I will go through later in this video. And I just wanted to show you in this dungeon, this is my favourite Cavern of Echoes. I absolutely love Cavern of Echoes. It's so quick to run. And obviously if you do a challenge dungeon, you'll find your damage per second is slightly higher because you're still giving a huge amount of damage, but the bosses and the mobs, the elites, they all have a higher life, so you're going to hit harder and do more damage in one go, if that makes sense. Some of these monsters, they've got 4 million life, but you might be hitting like 1 million, so your damage per second is going to be less because you've got less to hit in that time. It doesn't really sound like I'm making sense, but you'll see what I mean. If you do a normal dungeon and then a challenge dungeon, quite often your damage per second will be higher in those challenge dungeons because you're hitting more in a shorter period of time with your damage. So we've got the boss here. Are we going to be able to take them down before any of those immunity phases? Hopefully so. I do like running dungeons solo. And just like that, Cavern of Echoes is complete. So you can see, really easy to complete. And we've got 3.9 million per second. Obviously, as I said, that does drop. As you can see, it's still dropping now because we're just wasting time standing in the dungeon. So it's not going to give you a real idea of what your actual damage per second is by running it in a dungeon. But I just wanted to show you how quickly you can actually complete a dungeon with this specific build as well. So now we're going to head back to Westmarch and I'll talk you through all of the details and everything that's in this build. So starting off, let's take a look at Reforges. So there's a couple of different Reforges you can use in this setup. This is the one I go for the most, other than the primary attack damage, because that obviously we're not using primary in this build at all. But this one, I've got all skill damage, critical hit damage, duration of beneficial effects, and attack speed increase. So generally I go for those Reforges, or I'm go for this. So we've got all skill damage, critical hit damage, duration of beneficial effects, attack speed increase, and then we've got the damage to elites. You could go for damage to monsters, damage to undead, etc. for that extra slot there. It does mean that you don't have any bonus buff. So the reason why I have this set up here with the primary attack is because I'm also then getting the wildfire set, and if I have that on all pieces, that means you then have that 12% chance when you defeat an enemy to summon a fireball spitting hydra, and that hydra will obviously deal more damage. So there is options here. As I said, primary attack damage isn't going to give us anything in this build, but those are the Reforges that I would generally go for. You can always swap primary attack out for something else, and I would recommend doing that in this build. As I said, I would probably go for something like this, damage to elite enemies, especially if you're running this in dungeons rather than in Halikri raids. But you can go for whatever Reforges you want. The most crucial ones are the skill damage increase, critical hit damage increase, duration of beneficial effects, and attack speed increase. Those are all super important to have in this setup. And then for your 5th Reforge, just go for whichever one you want to go for. Now, a couple of other things to mention while we're here is enchantments. So I do have some extra buffs here. So we've got Arcane Wind range is increased by 8%. Arcane Wind buff, that's pretty good to have. It does increase the range, so that's really helpful in dungeons. And we have the Lightning Nova here as well. So this increases your attack speed by 8% for 3 seconds. I have that on a couple of pieces, I believe. Might only be on that one piece now. So we have it on 2 pieces there. So we have that buff twice. So yeah, worth having the Lightning Nova and worth having the Arcane Wind buffs on that. Another thing is the curse gear, so curse properties. We've got atrophied. We've got when you deal continuous damage to an enemy, a dark field will appear under them, dealing 24% of your damage every second for 6 seconds to any enemies that remain in the area. Effect cannot occur more often than once every 90 seconds. So that is an important one to have in this build. The other one is detested. Create a dark void beneath you that lasts for 6 seconds when you use a skill that causes loss of control. Enemies take 24% of your damage every second when they remain within the area. Effect cannot occur more often than once every 90 seconds. We've also got wired. After you kill an enemy, release the surge of lightning that jumps 6 times between nearby enemies and deals 60% of your damage to them. Effect cannot occur more often than once every 30 seconds. I believe, we also have Nettled here. So this one, after you gain a shield for the next 6 seconds, every time you're hit, you will counterattack, dealing 40% of your damage to all nearby enemies. So those are the curse properties that I have active on this build. And these do also make a difference as well, especially the atrophied and the wired and also detested. Those are the main ones to have in this. Obviously, you can have this on up to 4 pieces of gear. So you could go for 4 pieces of detested and 4 pieces of atrophied. Those are what I would recommend in that. So while we're talking about gear, while we're talking about reforges, let's now take a look at exactly what gear I'm using. So for set items, we've got 4 pieces, of Vitus. So this increases the duration of all your beneficial effects on you or your party members by 30% and increases the target's attack speed by 30% for 3 seconds each time you use a skill to grant a beneficial effect to yourself or a party member. So beneficial effect is the same thing as a buff. So we do only have one buff skill, which is the slow time. However, because that obviously we're using that within the other skills, you activate that slow time and you can actually get this increase pretty regularly from the Vitus buff, so that's why I'm using that one. We've also got 2 pieces of End Winter, so your damage is increased by 15% when attacking chilled enemies and by 30% when attacking frozen enemies. Bosses immune to chill and freeze effects will become marked, triggering these bonuses. So that does work on boss monsters as well, which is why I really like this set, and I will go into a little bit more of why I'm using that in a moment. Alongside this, we're also using 2 pieces of Skybreaker's Bolt. Dealing damage unleashes a lightning blast at the enemy's location that shocks all nearby enemies, dealing 9,857 damage per second for 3 seconds. Cannot occur more often than once every 6 seconds. If other sources applies this effect to the same target again within 6 seconds, the duration will be reduced by 70% each time it is applied. So this means that obviously that bit at the end was added recently, so that it's not triggering as regularly. So if other source applies the effect, so if other source applies that shock, to the same target within 6 seconds, the duration is reduced by 70% each time it's applied. So shock is actually pretty big in Diablo Immortal. We've got a few areas that works from as well. I still think this set is worth using in this setup. I've seen a big difference by having this and by having the End Winter in this setup compared to what I had in this originally. So I definitely recommend going for 2 pieces of both of those and 4 pieces of Vitus. You can obviously use other sets if you want to. Gloom Guides is good if you're using Teleport in this build. I'm not using Teleport in this build. Or if you want to use the Barons, Feasting Barons does work quite nicely in this build as well, because we do have the bleed effect coming from one of our legendary gems. But I would recommend these sets over all of those other ones that you could use potentially in this build. So next up, we'll take a look at the actual essences. So on the helm, we've got Terminus Facade. So this one causes temporal flux. Slow time now causes you to enter temporal flux, causing your non-channel skills to reduce the cooldowns of your other skills and increase your movement speed. Slow time's cooldown cannot be reduced by this effect. Slow time cooldown is reduced by 7.2% from that essence, but an additional 10% there from the awakened slot as well. We're using Coat of the Astrum on the chest. So with this one, Lightning Nova now unleashes a wild arc that jumps rapidly between random targets, leaving behind sparks of electricity that continue to deal damage when it hits shocked enemies. Lightning Nova damage is increased by 18% and Lightning Nova damage is increased 10% from the awakened slot. So that is increasing, that is going to keep triggering, on shocked enemies. So we have the shock coming from the Skybreaker set. We also have shock coming from Void Spark. We also have shock coming from Lightning Nova itself, I believe. So yeah, this can do a lot of damage in this setup still. Yes, this was nerfed recently. However, if you're going to stand close to your targets like I generally do, you're not really going to see much of a difference from that. So it's still worth using Coat of the Astrum in my opinion. We have War Mage Mantle on the shoulder. So Disintegrate now launches a small arcane sphere that bounces between you and multiple enemies, dealing damage and shattering their armor. Disintegrate damage is increased by 18% and Disintegrate damage is increased 10% from the awakened slot. We have Hastened Oblivion on the pants. So with this one, Disintegrate's cooldown is reduced by 1.6 seconds when damaging enemies up to a maximum of 4.8 seconds. Disintegrate damage is increased by 10%. Now, I was originally using a different essence on the pants. Nedra actually recommended swapping it out for this essence, so shout out to Nedra for that. And I have actually seen a massive difference having this in the setup instead. A huge increase in the damage, so definitely worth going for these pants. I'm using Chisel of the Architect on the main hand. Now, a lot of people did not like this when it landed in game. I still really do like this essence. It works really nicely. So if this Arcane Wind now unleashes an icy cyclone in a targeted direction that explodes on contact with an enemy or upon reaching its final destination. This icy explosion damages and chills nearby enemies, freezing those that were already chilled. Arcane Wind damage is increased by 18%. Arcane Wind damage is increased by 10%. Now this one is chilling enemies. Because it's chilling enemies, it works nicely with I can't talk today, with End Winter, your damage is increased by 15% when attacking chilled enemies and 30% when attacking frozen enemies. So if you manage to get the freeze from this, then you're going to be increasing your damage a hell of a lot just by using it with the End Winter set. We have Trifling Piffle on the first offhand. When Lightning Nova hits a shocked enemy, it unleashes another Lightning Nova. Cannot occur more often than once every 4.5 seconds. Lightning Nova cooldown is decreased by 10%. So that works nicely, as I said, with the Skybreaker set and also with having Void Spark in the setup. We have Ossified Chromatera on the alternate main hand. So this one's slow time also increases your skill damage by 22.8% for 3 seconds. Slow time cooldown is decreased by 10%. And this main hand, sorry, not offhand, keep getting my words wrong. This main hand is incredible. I highly recommend this. If you get this essence and you're using slow time in any build, equip this main hand. It is incredible. And then lastly, using Unrepentant Gale on the alternate offhand. Now, this one is giving you another charge of Arcane Wind. Arcane Wind cooldown is reduced by 3.6% and the damage is increased by 10%. You could potentially swap this out for a different offhand. I prefer to have this one for that extra charge of Arcane Wind because it's basically giving you an extra hit of Arcane Wind, an extra source of damage, basically, because you can do several hits of Arcane Wind instantly with this. Alternatively, if I was to swap this out, I would go for this one, Older Crystal. So Arcane Wind now also freezes chilled enemies for 2.4 seconds, because that again would mean you get more damage and more results from the set for End Winter. So that's an alternative that you could use. I'd maybe go for Older Crystal if you're playing this build on PC or on tablet. So now we've gone through all of the essences that we're using. Let's take a look at Legendary Gems, and I'll also talk through the Legendary Gems that you could use if you are free to play. So next up, we're going to look at Legendary Gems. So I'm going to talk through the gems that I think work really nicely in this setup. So we have Berserker's Eye. This increases the damage you deal by 5.5% at rank 1, but also increases damage you take. Now, ignore the damage you take because you're going to be moving around a lot with this build and it's going to be hard for things to hit you. But Berserker's Eye, if you're free to play, is a really good option. We also have the Everlasting Torment. So your critical hits inflict agony, dealing 10% base damage plus 122 every second for 6 seconds. Each enemy cannot be affected by this more often than once every 20 seconds. So Everlasting Torment, agony is another thing like burn, bleed, poison. So harmful effect and really worth using. So Everlasting Torment is another nice option. We also have Entropic Well. So this one increases the skill damage by 6% at rank 1. I'll show you that at rank 10 in a moment so you can see what it looks like. And Surging Sea at rank 1 increases skill, using a skill increases your skill damage by 0.8% for 3 seconds, stacking up to 10 times. So at rank 1, that can increase your skill damage by 8%. At rank 10, I'm pretty sure it's like 56% roughly, but I will show you that in a moment so you can see exactly how much that increases it by. We have Bloody Reach. This increases all damage you deal by 2% for every 2 yards between you and the enemy hit, up to a maximum of 8% at 8 yards. Again, this is at rank 1. Bloody Reach can be really nice if you're a ranged class, so whether you play Wizard or Demon Hunter. If you're using Demon Hunter and you're just watching this video for fun, Bloody Reach is a pretty good one as well. But if you're free to play, yeah, I would go for that in this setup as well. We also have Pain Clasp, which I would say is a must-have. Increases damage dealt by 8% to enemies suffering from a continuous damage effect. So you're going to get continuous damage from a few different areas with this build. You're going to have that freeze and the shock that's going to be like constant pretty much. So that should work quite nicely as well. Mother's Lament is a must-have. When you deal damage, you have 20% chance of gaining Maternal Disdain, increasing your critical hit chance by 12% for 6 seconds. Can't occur more often than once every 20 seconds, but Mother's Lament is really, really good in this build. I would say if you're going to use Pain Clasp, Mother's Lament, I'd go for Viper's Bite as well, just so you have a harmful effect. Obviously, in my setup, I'm using Blood Flow, so I have a harmful effect from that, but Viper's Bite is a good option instead. So damaging enemies poisons them with Viper's Venom, causing them to take 16% base damage, plus 120 damage every second for 6 seconds. Cannot occur on the same target more than once every 20 seconds. Again, that is at rank 1, but Viper's Bite is another nice option. Cold Confidant, if you're fighting or if you're using this in raids, this is another good option. So dealing damage summons a pillar of ice at the enemy's location with life equal to 300% of your maximum life, and enemies near the pillar are chilled and dealt 15% base damage. So because you're chilling them from this, you're going to get more damage again from End Winter and from your other freeze attacks. If you have Morn Skull, if you have Crimson Bailey, I would use them, but I'm not going to talk through them because obviously they are not available to get anymore, and you can see Morn Skull is actually out of stock on our market as well. But Spectre Glass is another one that you can go for. So critical hits shatter enemy armor for 2 seconds, increasing the damage they take from you by 10%. Can occur on the same target more often than once every 6 seconds. So those are the options that I would suggest if you're free to play. I'd definitely say the top 3 that you must have in this build would be Mother's Lament, Entropic Well, and Surging Sea. So if you are free to play, make sure that you have those 3 options at least in this setup, and you will see a good amount of damage from this. Now, looking at the legendary gems that I've actually got in this setup myself, I'm not going to talk through all of them, but I'll show you the description on the screen so you can read through this if you want. We've got Blood-Soaked Jade at rank 8. We have Surging Sea at rank 10. We have the Roiling Consequence at rank 7. We have Blood Flow at rank 6. I've got Void Spark at rank 6. I've got Bottled Hope at rank 7. I've got Wolfure at rank 8. And I also have the Colossus Engine at rank 6. Now, Surging Sea, as I mentioned, this is a free-to-play gem. This is a 1-star gem. So at rank 10, this increases, using a skill increases your skill damage by 2.4%. So this goes up to 24%, a maximum of 10 stacks. Inside this, I have Entropic Well, which I'm just going to remove so that I can actually show you the description on this, because it doesn't show you the description when it's inside of a gem. So with Entropic Well, this increases skill damage by 18%, increases skill attack speed by 4% as well. So that is a really, really good free-to-play gem to have. Another one I did forget to mention as free-to-play is you could go for Misery Elixir. So again, if you're going to be using things like any kind of burn gem, any kind of poison gem, or a bleed gem, if you're going to use any of those, so if you're going to use Mother's Lament, if you're going to use Viper's Bite as free to play, Misery Elixir is another option that you could go for. So the duration of your harmful effects you inflict is increased by 24%. Damage dealt to enemies suffering from harmful effects is increased by 2%. So again, that is another option. Again, you could use that if you're using Everlasting Torment as well, because that has that agony. So that is another harmful effect. So those are the options that I would go for legendary gems. Now let's take a look at Paragon, and I'll talk you through what I'm using for that. So Paragon, I'm using the Slinger Paragon, and within this I'm using Careful Aim. So for every meteor from an enemy, your damage against them is increased by 2% up to 8%. Now, one thing I've noticed with that is even when I'm pretty close to target, it still deals a decent amount of damage. We're also using Sharp Eye. For every meteor from an enemy, your critical hit chance against them is increased by 2% up to 8%. Again, I find that even if I'm close to the enemy, I still get a good amount of damage from that. We're using Precision. The effects of Careful Aim and Sharp Eye increase from 2% to 3% per meter. We've got Bloodthirst. Using a skill while in combat increases the damage you deal to monsters by 1% for 10 seconds. Bloodthirst stacks up to 5 times, but all stacks are removed if you take damage. And we're also using Deadly Intent here, so damage is increased by 2%, so that's your damage overall. Now for the legendary Paragon skill, I'm using Lightning Rod, so dealing damage to an enemy 10 times within 3 seconds, causing lightning to strike them, dealing damage to all your nearby enemies. So any lightning damage is increased by shock, so as you're going to have shock on the enemy, on the mobs, on the bosses, the Lightning Rod will have more effect as well. You could alternatively go for Death's Release. So when your continued damage or harmful effects expire, they explode, dealing 30%. The reason why you could go for that is because if you're using Burn, Bleed, or Poison, I've obviously got Burn from Roiling, and I've got Poison from the Blood Flow Legendary Gem. So that is a different option that you could go for if you wanted to in the legendary skills. And then for Warband buff, let's take a quick look at this also. So I'm using the Attacker buff, and with this one, we've got damage done is increased by 3.5%, critical hit chance increased by 1%. We've got that twice, and that does stack. Increase your damage dealt by 1% for 2 seconds every time you deal damage. This effect stacks up to 10 times, but is removed if you take damage. Increase critical hit chance by 3% while above 70% of your total life, and increases critical hit damage by 10% while your critical hit chance is greater than 70%. Now obviously these are the remnants that I have in my warband. You may not have these in yours, so farming remnants is really important to ensure you get the best buffs that you can from your warband rooms as well. So that is, I think, everything that is in this build. We do have familiars as well. Let me just touch on this quickly. I'm not the hottest person on familiars. I'm using Quake Strider as my main familiar. And this one, we've got Maim active, so that increases critical hit chance. And I've got Finesse active as well, which increases critical hit damage. Does increase the primary attack damage from Bestial Might, but I'm not obviously using primary attack in this. I believe that I have primary attack from my familiar there. We have Maim here, so critical hit chances increase. Now Maim does stack, so if you have that on all of your equipped familiars, that does stack, and if it's active on all of your familiars as well. So this one, we've got those are inactive other than Salvager, that's why I've got that pet. And lastly, I won't get Maim or Finesse or Bestial Might or anything from this one. I do need to swap that pet out for something different. I've just got it equipped for now because it's not a Quake Strider that I wanted to lose anytime soon. But yeah, on my main companion, I've got the Maim and the Finesse active, which is, again, those two traits really help in this build. As I said, I'm not too hot on familiars, but I thought I would just touch on that quickly before we finish this video. So that is everything, I think, for this. If you want any, or if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. If you've been using a similar setup, let me know what kind of damage you're getting from this. And I'll see you in the next one. Hope you found this helpful. Have a great day.
Official Diablo Partner.